Good morning. Good morning, Con. How are you?
Oh, good morning, Dennis. We're doing fine, doing fine. But I do need to apologize for yesterday's class. I feel like I hijacked the question and answer session.
I don't think so at all. Why do you think that?
Well, that's kind of started that way, or it seemed that way to me. And then I kind of attacked Sana and then kind of thrown Samantha under the bus. So I got to definitely need to apologize to those guys for sure. But
Well, I did not perceive that at all. So, I always call on you because I know you'll say something.
yeah, I'll
So,
come up with something for sure.
yeah.
But not always the right thing, I think. But But that was not the intention. But that kind of wore on me all day yesterday. I kept thinking about that. I'm like, hey, you're something else today. Let me just tell you. But
Well, I don't know about everyone else, but I sure did not perceive that. So maybe I'm just such a big fan of you. I just kind of gloss over,
yeah, well, I appreciate it. But yeah. So how's things going on your end?
Things are going fine. We were really happy to have Andy yesterday, and to have the folks from Penn State and also from Central New York. What we're doing may well make sense in some other markets as well. So I don't know what that means for me as far as responsibilities or whatever, but it's always nice to get some attention, and particularly from a big organization like Penn State. They have 21 campuses that have something similar, an accelerator. It just happens not to be online, and it does not focus on e-commerce. So they're trying to see if there's something we're doing that they feel like they could adapt in some way. So I don't know.
Well, I could see you being the director of all of this and kind of just throwing it out with all your contacts and pulling everybody together for what guest speaker. Oh, this could turn into something really big.
Thank you. I'm kind of not that interested in that role.
I understand.
It means I've got to report to different bosses and actually work really hard, which is kind of against my nature at this point. But I think helping rural areas and entrepreneurs is something I really feel called to do. So maybe I can play a role in it, and we'll see what happens. Really the problem really is the business model, because we're free to the participants, so there's got to be a way to fund it, and someone like Penn State could do it as a rounding error based on the size of their budget. They just opened up a $58 million building just for their entrepreneurship program. So they've got a lot of money, and so we'll see where it all goes. One of the things that you run up against, which is, I don't know if you got a sense of that, but academic people have a different view of this kind of thing. They look in terms of curriculum and tests and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little hard for them to think about something like what we're doing. It just goes outside their grain. So like I say, we'll just have to see. Hey, Sana, how are you? Hey, Nikedra, how are you?
Hi, Dennis. I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I have a quick question, or before we get started, I don't get the messages for the classes on Monday. So for 2 Mondays in a row, I only get the ones Tuesday through the rest of the week. So I haven't joined the Monday classes.
Huh.
I don't know why.
Well, Grant, could you kind of see what's going on? I mean, basically we send out an email. So if you're getting them Tuesday through Thursday, I don't know why you wouldn't get them for Monday. It doesn't make any sense to me, but
I don't know either.
Just know, you can know this even if you don't get a message. It's always at this same URL. It doesn't change.
Okay.
So you can just come to it, and don't worry about it. Email's funny, and sometimes weird stuff happens. I don't know, but just keep this URL in mind. It's our permanent URL, if you will.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Sure. Hey, Ruth, how you doing today? All right. She's doing good. Brooke, how are you, Brooke? Can't hear you.
Now you can, yeah.
It's Brooke and Tammy. We're good.
Okay. Good.
And sorry, I couldn't get you off mute. I'm good too. Thanks, Dennis.
Okay, good. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about category design today, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, it just kind of an orientation. Think about any product. Let's just use a product like Windex. Okay, we all know what Windex is, and Windex is obviously in a category of product having to do with cleaning, or even more specifically, window cleaning. You could theoretically make Windex the product to clean your computer keyboard. I'm just making this up, okay? So it could become its own category leader of the best product to clean your computer keyboard. So this may not be the best example, but that's all I got today. To just give you an idea that a category, you may actually create your own category that is you're the only one in it, and you'll see some examples of that in our presentation. So let's jump to that. And okay, and just somebody give me a thumbs up that you can see that. And is it full screen?
Yes and yes.
Okay, great. Here we go.
So I want to walk you through the basic ideas about what category design is all about and how to think that way and how to how to take your company in that direction if that's something you want to do. So this is basically an overview, but some behind the scenes stuff about the book too. Just want to start out with a few reasons why it's important to think this way. And so one is everybody in this room probably knows and feels that it's way easier to start a company today than it was 20 years ago. Grab a laptop and a credit card, get on AWS, join up with somebody like Techstars. A couple people can have a company up and running in no time that can compete with the giants of the world. But what that means is that if anybody has a really interesting idea in an interesting new space, it quickly looks like this, with 1,000 other companies piling in to do what you're already trying to do. So it becomes really hard to stand out unless you are establish yourselves as some kind of a leader, a thought leader, a category king in a particular space. And another reason to try to go for this idea of category king, category creation, is that in any market that's really that's digital, it's a winner-take-all kind of situation. And you can measure that any way you want. Market share, you look at on-demand transportation, and Uber is the obvious category king in this space. It takes 73% of the market share, Lyft 23%. And so market value is another way you could measure it. And Airbnb in particular space worth $30-some billion. When HomeAway was sold, it was worth about $4 billion. Whether you measure it by total usage in the space of online storage, Dropbox kind of identified the category and came to dominate it. And even with all of Google's power and capabilities, it still only has 70% of the usage of this kind of online storage space. And another interesting reason for wanting to be a category king is the category kings tend to attract the best people. And here's a way we know about this. About a year ago, LinkedIn decided to do a study using its data to try to figure out what were the 25 companies that the most talented people in the world want to work for. And when a little background story on this, when LinkedIn wanted to do this study, they ran the data, but they also brought in a woman named Susie Welch to analyze the data and write about it. Now, Susie Welch is a pretty famous business journalist. She used to be the editor of Harvard Business Review. She also happens to be married to Jack Welch, who was the former CEO of General Electric and also kind of a business character in his own right. And so we didn't even really know about this project. And then one of my co-authors, Al Ramadan, got a call one day from Susie Welch saying, we're doing this study, and I happen to have been reading your book. And I noticed that if you map the companies that are landing on that list of the ones people want to work for to the idea of category kings, most of the companies on the list are identifiably category kings. And she wanted to talk to us about the dynamics and why that was. But towards the end of the interview, Al thought he'd ask, he says to Susie, well, how did you end up running across our book? And this was one of my favorite things I ever heard about the book was she said, well, my husband's Jack Welch. And I was like, yeah, I know who Jack Welch is. And she says, well, Jeff Bezos gave your book to my husband and said, you should read this. And then my husband gave it to me and said, you should read this. So that's apparently we're floating around in some pretty high, stratospheric circles there. But the bottom line here is that is also a really good reason to want to identify yourselves as this category king. So I wanted to walk you back a little bit because this is not something that was just based on like anecdotal evidence or just our particular instincts. When we started this project, we really wanted to back it up with some real data and background information. I'll walk you through this crazy chart here. We took data from thousands of venture-backed companies and just ran it and asked a whole lot of questions of this data and trying to just see what kind of patterns we could get out of it. And we ran across this one thing that we thought was kind of interesting, but we didn't quite know what it meant, but we'll get to that in a second. But what this ends up showing is that when we looked at the value created by venture-backed companies after they went public, post-IPO value, we noticed this pattern that if companies that went public before they were 6 years old, the trend line basically had them dropping in value from IPO time to after the post-IPO value tended to go negative. Companies that went public between 6 and 10 years old created enormous post-IPO value. And companies that went public after they were 10 years old tended to basically flatline. Didn't really lose value, they didn't really excite anybody either. And we wondered what this meant. We took it to places like Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan, the investment bankers there, and we said, we showed them this, and they said, this matches our instincts, this matches what we see. We never ran the data, but actually it's really interesting that, this kind of proves out, but kind of makes sense to us. But they didn't know why this was happening either. So we went searching, and we ran the next step when we asked why this was happening. Oh, by the way, yeah, here's just as a little reminder of that 6 to 10, some of the biggest successes. Facebook went public at 8 years, Amazon at 8 years, Salesforce at 6. Uber in 2018 is 9 years old, so it suggests that if they go public in a year and a half, just don't buy the stock. So we asked, why is this happening? And that led us to the work of an economist named Paul Gorosky. And Paul Gorosky studied category life cycles. And he ended up creating this very simple chart that has 2 steps to it, and I'll walk you through each one. So the first step is and this makes intuitive sense if you think about it. When a new category gets identified, and you're down here basically, and one company or 2 companies figure out that there's some new invention, some new cool thing to do, there's hardly any companies in a space. As soon as, think back to that chart with like a zillion companies on it, as soon as it starts to be identified that it's interesting space, zillions of companies jump in, right? You get this spike in the number of companies in the space, and then you get this time period when the number of companies starts to drop off because 1 or 2 kings solidify. They either acquire some of the other companies in the space or the other companies go out of business. And so the number of companies in that category starts to fall into a smaller number. And then over time, it kind of flatlines. It kind of stabilizes at a few companies that are dominating that space. The other half of the curve goes like this, which is when a category is created, obviously it's worth pretty much nothing. And it takes a while for people to get the idea and it start to have some real value into that category. And then all of a sudden it catches on and it spikes. The total value of that category starts to spike. And over time it matures and levels off. So Gorosky put these together and created this chart of what a category life cycle looks like. And as you can imagine, the value is still climbing. The number of companies pile in, even though the value is not there. Suddenly the category catches on, king emerges, and it consolidates. But the category is actually taking off now and spiking. And then you get to some place where there's 2 or 3 companies dominating, and the category is pretty much mature and flatlining. And as you can probably tell, when you look at that chart and you say, well, that kind of overlaps to this. And it makes some sense because in this particular phase, the category is very uncertain, and who's going to be the king is very uncertain. So you get situations like Groupon going public when it was 3 years old, and you've got a category that looked really promising, but ended up not being so promising, and a company that went public at a huge valuation and ended up tanking afterwards. In this particular time period, you end up with one or two companies emerging that seem like they're going to be the obvious kings of this spiking category, and investors are very excited. That's when you want to put money in a company, and so the value starts to climb because it's got a lot of upside. And then in this last phase over here, what tends to happen is that as the category sort of matures and flatlines and the number of players consolidates, it's all of the excitement is out of it. It's just basically a mature stock at play at that point. So that's why when companies go public when they're late, it doesn't do bad, it doesn't do good. It's just that all of the information is already there, right? You're not really like investing in something that's going to spike. So we still, we're asking the question of, but why is that happening? Why do those time frames make sense? And that led us to brain science, of all things. And I had a role in this because this is a book that I wrote, came out in 2011, that was about the intersection of brain science and computer science and how those two fields were learning from each other. And by doing this book, it plugged me into the neuroscience community. And of course, we were big fans of Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is all about our brains and how they work and the biases that we have inside of our brains. And so I took the data and the research we had done to a few of my neuroscience friends and said, what does this mean to you? Like, how does this map to anything that you understand? And they said, absolutely, it does. And they started talking to us about the cognitive biases in our brains. And cognitive biases are these things in our brains that make us make decisions that are not based on logic. We actually don't make decisions based on facts. We make decisions based on these biases that get embedded in our brains. And there's some 50 of them. Like one is the choice supportive bias, which just means that if you buy a particular product, you tend to think it's the best product because you were so smart because you bought it. It's just out of a flywheel that goes around. And groupthink is what it sounds like. We tend to be influenced by what people think around us. And these biases influence our decisions in a very, very meaningful way. So there's another aspect of things that the neuroscience are talking to us about, and this leads us back to some of the category conversation, that when there's too much choice, when there's a lot of stuff out there, our brains categorize things. And that's why, for instance, when you go in the grocery store, it's not arranged alphabetically. It's arranged by categories, because that's how you think. And you want to go in and you want to find the spaghetti sauce, and you go to the aisle where the spaghetti sauce is, and then you make the choice out of a bunch of things that are on the shelf. Interestingly, in business, a line item on a budget is essentially a category. And that's how, again, we think when we run a company. We need, I know I need some public relations, for my company. And then you think, what's the company that's the most, the dominant one, or the one that, is most important for me to engage in that category. So a winning category strategy actually creates a new line item. If you're a B2B company, creates a new line item on somebody's budget. And so when we create these categories in our minds, and our biases tend to put one or two category kings in that space. When you go to the spaghetti sauce aisle, you probably think there's a spaghetti sauce that you think is the best one or the best value for you to buy, and it's already in your brain. You're not going to go there every time and stare at every one and read the ingredients and look at the prices and decide which one to buy. And here's some, just some categories that are, we pretty obviously have category kings in, and they establish themselves in our minds as those kings. And yes, and once we have those, established as those winners in categories, those biases tend to keep them there. So what that all comes back to is the idea that if you're the CEO of a company, one of your jobs is to actually exploit these brain shortcuts. It's actually to condition our minds and make us have those biases in our brains, and so that you can be seen as this category king and embed people in people's brains. And the back end of this that we got from as we talked to the neuroscience folks is that it takes sustained effort. It's not something that happens with one TV commercial on a Super Bowl. It happens by over and over emphasizing that particular product and that brand and in convincing people that space exists and that you're the king in it. And if you think of a bell curve of the population, you're going to capture some of those early adopters, in those first couple of years. But what happens is that to get to the heart and the meat of the bell curve of what you're trying to influence actually takes that sustained effort over some 6 to 10 years. And that's why we end up with these kinds of time frames that tend to work for any industry, any consumer products, business to business products. It seems to be this is how fast the majority of people's minds can move. So as a CEO or a company founder, I mean, basically, what it comes down to is maybe your most important job is to condition people's brains. This is Steve Jobs conditioning our brains. And when he got up on stage, this is classic Steve Jobs, when he got up on stage to introduce the iPad, he literally got up and he said, "We are creating a new category of product." And he said, we have this new age of digital media. We consume this digital media. The phone is too small. The screen's too small to really enjoy, video and things like that. The laptop's too big. It's too clunky. You can't really sit on your couch and lounge and do it. And so we're going to introduce this new category of product that's made for our times. And it's this thing called the tablet, and our product is called the iPad. And he established the idea. We didn't know we even had that problem before Steve Jobs got up on stage and said, you have this problem. And then we all go, oh yeah, actually I do have that problem. I would like to have something like that. And by identifying the category and identifying the problem, he convinced us that he had the solution because he was the only one that was smart enough to figure it out. And we go, yeah, no, I guess I do need an iPad. I'll go out and buy one, $400, great. Importantly, though, the idea is, if you think even of the Steve Jobs example, when you think about category, it's not just about the message. It's actually about what you do. It's the strategy of your company. And it informs everything about your company. And we use this chart. This is in the book. And let me explain. So, as many of you probably know very well, right? When a company starts, it basically starts with product design. It's a couple of people have a good idea. We can build this thing, or we see this opportunity, and you go and you build a product, and that's what you're focused on, creating this cool new thing. And then usually the second thing that happens is, okay, I've got this cool new thing that I've created. Now I need a company to build it, sell it, do all those things that a company does. And you start thinking about what kind of company do I want to have? Where do I want to put it? What kind of people do I want to have in it? What's the logo look like? All those things are designing your company. Now, I would guess that most of you and most people who ever start a company basically stop there. Got a product, we got a company, go. And what we found when we studied all of these companies was that the companies that really succeed and really blow it out have a third thing that they think about, and they think about the space they're going into and how to influence it and how to create it and how to develop that category in people's minds. And by seeing the space, by understanding what the space is and what the problem is they're going to solve, it actually comes back and influences all these other things. Because when you see this very clearly, it helps tell you what kind of product to build. And when you see this space very clearly. It helps tell you what kind of company to build. But also it's a constant motion because whatever, the product you've built and the company you've built help influence what the category is that you're looking at. But all of these pieces need to go together to help you to have a really forward-thinking company strategy. So if you want to do this, how do you start to think this way? The idea of looking for what's missing. And that's, if you're looking at a market and it's already there and you're saying, well, that looks like a big market. This whole idea that has been around for a long time of, oh, that's a big opportunity. There's space for, several winners in that particular space. That's just total bull. It's just not, it's not true in digital markets, because we go back to, in digital markets, winners tend to take all. And so what you want to do is you want to look for a space that's new and that's missing. This is what Airbnb did when they got started. If you think about the story of Airbnb, these two guys in San Francisco had an apartment, a couple of designers, and there was a conference in town that all the hotels were sold out. And they thought, they didn't have much money. They thought, well, hey, we could blow up a couple of air mattresses, put them on the floor, and serve Captain Crunch in the morning, and put this on Craigslist, and maybe we'll get a couple people that would want to, rent this from them. It worked. They quickly realized they thought this, and actually the whole company in the beginning was geared towards the idea of creating space when there were big conferences in town, in any particular town. But they thought realized that there was this missing thing of how do you have these sort of short-term opportunities to rent a place when hotels don't work and you don't want to have a long-term rental on something like Home Away. And they constantly saw a bigger and bigger missing as they went. But this was a new space that they created. In fact, at one point, I was at this big business conference and sat next to the CEO of Marriott, and I turned to him and I said, well, you guys must really hate Airbnb, don't you? And he surprised me and he said, no, we don't hate them all. We don't even feel like we compete with them. He said, we hate like Expedia and Travelocity because they their fees take a portion of our revenue, but these guys, we don't care because they see it as a completely different space.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing, and I'm curious, particularly folks who have not been exposed to category design before, what your reaction is or your thoughts are. Nikedra, what do you think? Okay, Brooke, how about you?
So we were just coincidentally right before this webinar, we were in Square getting our categories defined, which is on a much smaller scale than what you guys are talking about, but it's the same idea. Yeah. If I don't have it clear, it's not showing up on the website store correctly. And so exposed on this level, I have not been, but categories make sense. It makes good sense.
Well, just, and I don't know a lot about your business, but I know that you have essentially an urban farm.
Yep.
So I would argue that you have the chance to create the category urban farm in this market, right? In North Carolina or Eastern North Carolina. So that's the kind of logic, really, thinking about how can I define what we do? It's one thing to be a farmer. It's one thing to be sustainable. It's one thing to be organic, all of the various labels that we all have or that we are aware of. You also have the opportunity to be a category of one, and thinking about your brand attributes, your brand things that you do, how can that kind of create that, and then your marketing. I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but then your marketing could be, the first urban farm in North Carolina. Yeah, I'm just making that up. But that kind of stuff really cuts through the clutter and cuts through the communication. And what this guy's trying to say, even though all of his examples are big tech companies that we may be familiar with, it's the same thing. I mean, though, as he said, when you find something that works, every single company seems to go in that space and try to compete. So if you can define your category and be in that category, you can be the winner take all. And so that's what I like about this whole subject. Nikedra, how about you? What is your reaction to this?
I agree. Categories could be very valuable, and I think they do let you cut through all the other competition and competing voices of sorts that are out there, especially if there are people who do what you do.
Yeah. One thing, you can get that book on Amazon. It's called Play Bigger. It's a really good book, and a lot of people use it as kind of a Bible, if you will, of category stuff. This company, the name of their company is Category Design. I mean, there's not many people that are specifically in that niche. So I highly recommend the book if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it. Branson, what do you think about this stuff?
From the first class, when I first learned about it, I started defining my categories of how to label myself differently, which made me position, being a music producer, there's a lot of music producers. So I had to come up with a title and a category that made what I do unique. And from watching that video the first time, it really helped me hone in and what to make me stand out, especially when someone's searching for me. So the category that you choose, or just like you were talking about with the urban farm, a lot of people have farms, but not too many people really call it an urban farm. So if someone was searching, that would stick out because that's not a name that you hear every day.
Yeah, a description, you mean? Yeah, categories. Yeah. Ruth, what do you think? I know you've had some time to think about categories over the years or over the year.
Yeah, so it's really interesting on two levels. One is that, jam feels like a pretty basic thing. And I have thought a lot about how to put wrappers around it so that it does seem unique. And I'm still working on that. But this is a very helpful discussion. And every time I hear it, it makes me think of new things. But we also were having a discussion with the North Carolina Specialty Foods Board, and I'm on the board a couple of weeks ago, actually, about this topic, because we were trying to design category labels, if you will, for the directory for the awards. And so there was a big discussion around, so what is, take my jam, for example. So where would you put it? Is it a preserve? Is it a pantry item? Is it a sweet? Some would say if it's a savory, you could use it as a condiment. And so there's just, we had a really interesting discussion about how to create categories for the products in general, not, across our membership. So it's, I think we came up with a reasonable solution for the time being, but I guess the point here is that it's not cut and dried, and that we look at it, I think, and it keeps evolving as you think about what you do.
Right. That's really good. I think that, and this is kind of tangential, but when you think about what is kind of this purpose of category design, or what's the benefit of embracing this concept, and it comes down to me about, inside versus outside. If you're inside the business, you develop certain attitudes, certain experiences, certain viewpoints. And I would argue that sometimes that viewpoint is not matched by your customers, by the outside folks. And the best example I keep coming up with or coming across is in the grass-fed beef space. which is a very interesting space to me for a bunch of reasons. But one of the things that happens in that space, a lot of consumer products have been really, engulfed with this idea that I need to be organic or I need to have certain labels in order to be competitive. And so there's a lot of effort put into getting these various categorizations or various descriptions so that you feel like your business, can benefit. And what I'm learning, and this is a particular example with the grass-fed beef, consumers are not as concerned with that as you might think. It's an issue, but is it the issue that drives their purchase or not? And the example I've seen with the grass-fed beef is, whether the beef is actually finished on grass or finished on grain, right? So you have grass-fed when they're in the pasture eating the grass, but then as they get ready to go to market, are they fattened up with grain or some other method that maybe not as exciting or as appealing to consumers? And what I've learned based on sales is that's not the most important thing to consumers, at least in many cases. What they're really interested in is this a transparent, honest, credible source of this food? Is this something I can understand and relate to? And the whole idea of insisting that you need a particular label or a particular handle, to me, is not necessarily true. And the way you deal with some of those dichotomies is through this category designation. You can be the leader in a space that no one else is in. And that also helps consumers. In Ruth's example, talking about her board meeting, they're trying to get a handle on how the various members, how they participate. But bigger than that, and more important, in my opinion, is what are the consumers looking for? What are your potential customers' categorization or their view of what it is you do? So I just kind of keep that in mind. If you get really wrapped up tight with certain labels or certain, I got to have this in order to be successful, test that out. I think you need to really think about that. And the more information from our previous discussions about learning who our customer is and what's important, I think that will help you. You maybe really think about what does the market need, and you may well discover a need that no one else has discovered. Right? You may be a category definer or somebody who's really figured out what the customer is looking for. So I just want to throw that out. Any other kind of reactions or questions? Hi, Sydney. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. All right. Anybody want to opine about this whole thing, or anybody want to share experiences that they've had in figuring out their category?
Dennis, sorry, I stepped away for a little bit. So you probably already know this, but for some of the people that are new here that don't know, I've had a little bit of a trouble figuring out where my product fits. Again, for those that don't know or don't remember, it's these little packs that are made with vegetables, seasonings, spices that I say that, you can simply just mix in a couple tablespoons of water, mix in your eggs, and then that's your little egg mix, and you cook it any way you like. So I call it an egg kit, and this is a dry pack. I don't think that this is a seasoning. It's not a spice. It doesn't really belong in the dairy aisle. You can use it for things that are other than eggs, even though they're called it. So I've gone through this with several grocery stores. This product currently sits in tiny little specialty stores around the area. There's one that has it on a strip in the egg aisle next to the eggs, but most of them have them sitting with sauces or spices. I've recently been talking to Food Lion, and they're considering this under their canned vegetables aisle, and I don't necessarily agree with that, but you know what, whatever. If they want to place it there, it's Food Lion. They can do that. So I think it's a category of its own. But I don't know. I call it meal kits. I mean, it could be a mini meal kit. That's where I would put it, but many of the people that I talk to don't agree with that. So that's just my experience.
Okay. I think that, you know, this is an example of really a product that really is its own category. I mean, it's not a canned, you know, it's a powder form. You know, we see a lot of protein shakes and keto related products that come in powder form. That's what comes to my mind in terms of who is doing this on a broad scale. And I think either meal replacements or meal enhancements seem to be powders in many cases. And this is also where, you know, like an example, I would argue a Food Lion customer is different than a customer you might gain from San Francisco. I'm just making that up. You know, I mean, there's just really different populations. And one of the challenges is even defining who your customer is, you know, because it may be lots of customers. I know Sana in a previous example talked about, she was surprised that elderly women were her biggest category. Elderly women buying this for preparation at home for meals. It's not something she even thought about as a target, and it turns out to be her biggest segment at this point. So I think this all goes to the point about, you know, the customer discovery and also the category. If you don't have a category, it's almost impossible to identify all the particular customer segments. It just becomes like just a really overwhelming kind of process, I think, to figure it out. So I encourage all of you to think that through in terms of category. And is there an opportunity for you to do something that really is, you know, a new category, a groundbreaking or something that people just didn't think about before? And that gives you an opportunity to at least consider it. You know, it's not something you have to do. It's something you may want to do based on the information that you gather. So.
I'd like to add, Dennis, that when I think about category design, you know, at least for my product, I'm thinking if somebody was looking for something like this, which aisle would they go to? And that's where I have trouble because this product, it's not out there. People don't know about this product and they probably wouldn't even think to go look for it. So which aisle would it be reasonable for them to run into this? And I have trouble coming up with that. There are similar products that exist, like you guys might have heard of just crack an egg, right? It's the exact same thing, except the difference is that comes in a little cup and that has to be refrigerated. So that's in the refrigerated aisle, and it normally sits with eggs or prepared foods, like quick meal type things. This is the same thing, but it has a longer shelf life. So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, that's all I have for today. If there's any other questions, happy to answer. And we'll pick up on this tomorrow, more on category design. It actually gets even more interesting. I think you'll enjoy the second half of this. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to say au revoir until tomorrow. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.